So, hi everyone, thank you so much for coming. I'm really excited about talking to you. I love talking about this stuff. I get way too excited about trying to help people make a difference, overcome and become aware of their own biases, the weird stuff that our brain does, we don't even know what's going on. So, as mentioned, I'm a behavioural scientist. I worked for the Anti-Discrimination Commission for 4 years, where I developed their unconscious bias training, went around to all different companies and businesses, government, private, training them in unconscious bias, in Queensland anti-discrimination legislation, and helping them try to improve their practices. Right now, I'm working as a behavioural economics lead, so still working in influencing behaviour, but currently in the tax office, so I'm a little bit less passionate about the behaviours I'm trying to influence, but changing behaviours is really important. To get it out of the way, yes, my last name really is Incognito. No, I didn't change it to that. It's Sicilian, means exactly the same thing in Italian, and I do think it's pretty cool, except for when I've rocked up to the airport to find they've cancelled my tickets. Then it's slightly less cool, but in general I like it. So let's actually get into what we're talking about today. This will work better if I turn it on. What's the time? Okay. Alright, so let's start with talking a little bit about what unconscious bias is. Good place to start. You might have heard of it before, but perhaps not gone into a lot of detail. So to start with, let's talk about what it's not. Explicit or conscious bias or prejudice is the attitudes and beliefs and opinions that we have that we know that we feel that way. We could articulate it. We're often very happy to articulate it. Tonight's State of Origin night, you'll see plenty of people very happy to express their explicit prejudice or bias against the New South Wales team. Occasionally, brave people, there was one in my office I saw supporting New South Wales. That's explicit prejudice. It's quite different to unconscious bias, different process. Unconscious bias is the assumptions and associations that we've learned that we don't even realise are influencing us. Throughout our lives, we're exposed to so many different ideas. We learn associations about all sorts of things. We might have a preferred brand of laundry powder because it's the one our mum used, right? We might meet someone and take an instant dislike to them because they look like someone who was a jerk to us in school. We've learned an association there and that's influencing us now. But let's talk a little bit more about where it comes from and what's actually going on. So this here is a picture of the limbic system. It's a little bit of your brain right in the middle. This is not where we do our best thinking, right? The cortex, all the squiggly bits you can see on the outside that you're familiar with, that's where we actually think. That's where, particularly in our prefrontal cortex, we make decisions, we have our thoughts and ideas and higher level functioning. The limbic system isn't that. The limbic system is where we react, where we have emotional reactions, emotional experiences, where we experience threat. It reacts very, very quickly. The limbic system is an older part of the brain, and it evolved largely to deal with survival, right? Surviving, being able to pass on your genes, eat, all of those important things. So it reacts really, really quickly. And that part of our brain doesn't have the luxury of spending a lot of time thinking about what we're going to do. It had to act quickly or we'd miss opportunities, right? Or end up dead. So one way to look at it is we kind of have two thinking systems. There's a few different ways to refer to this. Fast thinking and slow thinking, the elephant and the rider. So fast thinking, or system one thinking, this is usually more in the limbic system, right? We're not actually using the better part of our brain here. It's fast, it's automatic, we don't get a choice in using it, it just happens instantly, right? This is where we make snap decisions, have gut feelings, things like that. It's blind, why is the yardie there? What you see is all there is. It doesn't take any of the broader context into account, it's just what's there, that's all the information. Slow thinking, or system two thinking, is what is happening when we're actually thinking about something, right? So it's a lot slower, takes effort. We try not to use that if we can get away with it, right? It takes a lot more energy, a lot more resources. If I asked you what is 1 + 1, most of you would have had an answer just come into your head like that. That's system one of fast thinking. If I asked you what is 917 multiplied by 37, most of you would probably have to use System 2, right? And maybe even a pen and paper. We like to think when we're making decisions about people, about things, that we're actually thinking about it, but most of the time, about 90% of the time, we're actually using System 1, right? So let's have a little bit more of a look at it. Looking at this checkerboard here, specifically at squares A and B, do they appear to be the same colour or different? The same shade of grey or different? I don't know about you, but when I look at it, A is very clearly a dark square, B is very clearly a light square. Does everyone see that?
Yeah.
Yep. Well, that's actually not the case. Turns out the GIF didn't transfer over. They are actually the same colour. So I can just go back and forward really quickly. It doesn't quite have the same effect. That's a shame. I have an excellent GIF. If you look it up on YouTube, this is Addison's checkerboard illusion. You'll be able to find it and have a look. But when we're looking at this, we see them as being different. That's because we have learned, and our brain, doing all of its automatic unconscious processing, takes into account things like the shadow here, right? We know that when something is in the shade, it must be lighter than it appears. It's like the dress a few years ago, right? People saw it as different colours depending on whether they perceived it as being in the light or in the shade, right? So our brain takes that information that we know, that we've learned, into account and decides that that must be a lighter square. We've also got this pattern. Our brains love patterns. We see them everywhere. We're terrible at not seeing patterns, right? So that's another unconscious process that we can't actually control, right? Even if I could show you the really excellent GIF that shows that these are the same, when I brought it back to this, you still wouldn't be able to see them like that, right? All of this unconscious processing is happening in the background. Let's look at a slightly different example of where what we know, what we've learned, what associations we've formed, can actually influence even really simple tasks. Many of you will have seen this before. Unless you've been practicing heaps, it should still work just as well. So we're going to all do this together, and I'll do it with you. What we're going to do is we're going to go from top to bottom, left to right, saying what colour the word is projected in. So this one would be orange. Green. That one would be red. Right? So what colour is the word?
I'm like, I can do this, I can do this.
There you go. So what colour is the word? So let's all just have a go at this. Again, we'll do it together. You don't have to shout it, but let's do it out loud because it's fun. And let's just observe what happens, right? Is everyone ready? Okay, let's go.
Red, blue, orange, purple, orange, blue, green, red, green, red, green, blue, purple. I could do it!
So what did everyone notice while we were doing that? It gets a lot harder, right? The first couple of lines, no worries. Once the colour and the word stop matching, it's like there's gears crunching in your head. Right? This is called the Stroop test, if you want to look it up. So what's happening here is because we have learned to read in English, and apologies to anyone who couldn't read in English, that would have been a really boring task for you. Because we've learned to read in English, that's now an automatic System 1 process. We can't look at these words and not read them. So when we're trying to perform this task, there's something called a response competition effect, which is we're trying to do the thing, which is say what colour it is, but we can't not read it, so that gets in the way of what we're actually trying to do. So even something as simple as this, what we know, what we've learned, what we've experienced is already influencing us. So we have all of these mental shortcuts that we use, right? Because we've got so many problems that our brain has to deal with on a daily basis. We need to have shortcuts, or we wouldn't survive. If we had to think deeply and consciously about every single thing we did, we would never get out of bed in the morning. It would be overwhelming. So you can sort of break up the problems that our brains face into a few key themes. So first up, too much information. Purely sensory information, we're receiving around 11 million bits per second through what we're seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, the feeling of our clothes on our skin. 11 million bits. We cannot consciously attend to that much information. Right? We can maybe consciously, if we're really good, do about 50. So our brain's constantly filtering out information that we think isn't useful, focusing specifically on bits that we think are important to us and relevant. If you've ever been at a party or a loud social event, for example, excuse me, I shouldn't have had that beer, and most of the talk is just sort of chatter and noise and it's not really words, but someone, you know, over there says something that sounds like your name and that just cuts through, right? Because our brain's kind of scanning, filtering out most stuff, picking out anything that looks useful to us. So another one, even though we're getting way too much information, we're never getting enough meaningful information. We never know the whole context of what's going on, right? So we're always filling in gaps to make sense of the world, to understand what's happening. So this might be, for example, if I get into the lift at work and I say hello to someone and they don't say hello back, I might assume that it's because they don't like me or I've done something to annoy them. Realistically, actually, they've got their headphones in and they were thinking about something else and they didn't even see me, but I'm filling in the blanks because I don't have all the useful information. We need to act fast. We don't have the luxury of always spending ages working out what we're going to have for lunch, what am I going to wear to work. Think about something like crossing the street. How many factors are involved in that, right? Is there a car coming? If so, how far away is it and how fast is it travelling? That could be a question in a physics exam in school to work out how much time you've got to cross the street, but we don't do that. We just unconsciously, automatically process it, work out what's going on so we can cross. And we don't know what we need to remember. Right? There's so much useless information coming at us all the time. We don't know what bits we need to actually stick in our brain, and we don't have time to really dig through and find the useful bits most of the time, so we use generalizations to save time. It's far more efficient, it's quicker, and half the time we get some sort of useful ballpark info to work with. So because of these problems that our brains face every single day, we have over 150 different mental shortcuts that we use. Every single one of these is some sort of cognitive bias, a mental shortcut that we use that kind of gets us by, but actually usually doesn't get us to the right answer. Might get us to close enough, doesn't get us killed, but it's not always correct. So this is where we make assumptions, where we incorrectly think that maybe someone's annoyed at us, or we see someone with tattoos and think that they must be, dangerous, or something like that. Lots and lots of mental shortcuts. If I had more time, I'd love to go through some really cool examples of these with you, but tonight, got to keep moving, unfortunately. So let's look at another example of our associations, things we've learned, and how we're using these mental shortcuts. Now what I'm going to do here, I need to be very, very explicit with the instructions here because it often gets ruined. I'm going to read out this riddle, and I would like nobody to say anything at all. If you have an answer or if you've seen it before, please do not shout out the answer or what you think it might be, because it spoils it. All right. Can I just see a show of hands who has seen this before? Wow. All right, who hasn't? All right, there are a few of you. Those who have, keep your mouth shut, please. All right. A young boy and his father are in a car accident. The father dies at the scene. The boy is taken to hospital and rushed immediately into surgery, but the surgeon steps out of the operating room and says, "I can't operate on this boy. He is my son." Now again, nobody shout out any answers at all. The question is, just have a think, who is the surgeon?
Mother? Sorry.
How clear do I need to be with these answers?
I was just busy thinking out loud. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. It's quite funny when that happens, especially when I've just spent a lot of time saying, "Don't say anything, anyone, please." Okay. So, over the many times I've shown this particular riddle.
I've never seen it before, by the way.
Hey, kudos to you, you're in the 30% that comes up with the answer. I've heard all sorts of really fascinating responses. So, there's an adoption or stepfather scenario, right? One of the best ones I heard is that one of the fathers is as in priest, there was a priest involved, and that's what we meant by father. The first time I saw this, I was like, I don't know, same-sex relationship, he's got 2 dads, right? So anyone who saw this and didn't think mother, or if you have seen it before and didn't come straight to mother that time, look, don't feel bad, because it doesn't mean that you don't think women can or should be surgeons. That's not what's happening at all. What's happening is we've learned to picture a man when we picture a surgeon. That's the association that we've learned. That's what we've seen and experienced over and over in the media, maybe in other situations, and so that's what we've learned to expect. So that's what comes to mind. That's our shortcut jumping in there. Does that make sense? All right, cool. Let's keep moving. So, it's okay, I forgive you. So we have these mental shortcuts. They're there to save us time, make things easier for us. They're quite adaptive. Where do we actually get these associations that we've formed? Where do we learn these assumptions? All sorts of places. So from our culture, what ideas are prevalent in our societies, what we see in the media. If the only representation of, say, a gay man is a character on a TV show, that's going to be your best guess of what to expect when you meet a gay man, because you have no other information, right? So our culture influences this. The ideas that we hear out in society, even knowing actual different stereotypes, this is really depressing, but means they can influence you unconsciously, even if you don't consciously agree with them, right? Because that unconscious reaction is happening first. Our own experiences and developmental history, so what we were told as kids, the ideas we were brought up with in our family, and our personal experiences. If the only experience you've had with someone from a particular group was, for example, really horribly negative, then the next time you meet someone from that group, you're probably going to be a little bit on edge and a little bit wary, because again, that's the only information you have, that's the association that you've formed. And this can happen really, really quickly too. Think of a little kid touching a hot stove. They're not going to go, in the interests of science, touching a bunch of stoves to see whether it applies across the board. One experience and the association is formed. We also have a preference for our in-groups. So we are all members of various groups, and these group memberships are really important to us. They form a huge part of our identity, right? So we might have our identity as man or woman, as Australian, as Queensland supporter if you're into state of origin, as Game of Thrones fan, who knows, whatever it is, these groups, they're really meaningful to us. And with any in-group, there's also an out-group. So there's us, and there's the people who aren't us. Probably not going to surprise anyone, we tend to give more favourable treatment to in-group members. We also see out-group members as being kind of all the same. They're kind of interchangeable. My group's full of special snowflakes, and I can tell the difference, but that group over there, I can't even tell them apart. So all of this influences the associations and assumptions that we have. I really wish I had so much more time to actually go into detail about this stuff. All right. All of these together mean that we have these assumptions and associations that we don't even realise are there, and they actually lead to how we behave, how we treat people. If my association with, I don't know, people named Bob is that they're jerks, when I meet someone called Bob, I'm probably not going to be as friendly to them, right? So anytime, basically, we're interacting with or making a decision about another person, our assumptions, associations, unconscious biases are going to have a lot of space to play a role in that, to influence us. More specifically, this can affect how we interact with clients and customers. I know I've heard many stories of people who've had a bad experience with a particular type of customer, and then the next time someone who resembles that customer comes in, they're not so helpful, right? Because we've got that negative association. How we interact with our colleagues. What assumptions do we have about how a young person or an older person is going to act, a person from a different race or religion or gender? Those assumptions are going to influence how we actually behave with each other. whether they're like us. If they're like us, we're likely to be a lot warmer and more friendly and more helpful. In the workplace, the decisions we make recruiting are a huge one. Right? So one study done just a few years ago, I think it was in Melbourne. It was in Australia. No, it was in Melbourne. The researchers sent out 4,000 fake resumes for entry-level positions. Now, these resumes were absolutely identical in every single way except for the names on them. And the names were of different ethnic origins. So there were Anglo-Saxon sounding names, Chinese sounding names, Aboriginal sounding names, and Italian sounding names. And it might not surprise anyone, if you had a white sounding name, you're far more likely to be offered an interview. So I think it was about 1 in 3 chance of being offered an interview with an Anglo-Saxon name compared to more than 1 in 5, like worse than 1 in 5 chance if it was a Chinese sounding name. Funnily enough, in Melbourne, Italian sounding names actually seem to do pretty well. But in general, the name on the resume and the associations around what that race meant influenced how many interviews they were offered. Similar things with male and female names on resumes. Another study, sort of similar situation, men and women trying to rate applications for a job in a lab. Right? Identical CV, one with a male name, one with a female name. The men and women rated the resume with a female name, rated her as being less competent, and recommended a lower starting wage. Right? This is all because of assumptions and associations that we don't even know are influencing us. If you asked any of these people whether they were biased, they would say no, and they wouldn't want to think that they were biased. So recruitment decisions are a huge one. Even how we behave if we're interviewing someone, right? Based on our unconscious biases, that's going to influence how close we sit, how much eye contact we make, what our body language does, whether we give them prompts, things like that. Who gets professional development opportunities? You know, if you have, say, a man and a woman starting on the same day and your perception is that guys are better in this field, so, you know, say Joe here, he's going to go a long way, Mary, oh, I don't know. You're going to be giving Joe those opportunities, encouraging him to come to the different meetings, to go to that conference. If you're not thinking Mary's going to be as good, you won't be giving her those same opportunities, and over time, that's going to become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Right? Pretty depressing. Can also predict whether people are going to leave a job. So drug and alcohol nurses, pretty challenging field of nursing. They were in a study where they were asked, okay, so they measured their conscious and unconscious bias towards injecting drug users, their work stress levels, and their job satisfaction. And then they asked them, are you going to leave this field of nursing within the next 12 months? Turned out, their unconscious bias was tied for the best predictor of whether they were going to leave. So how they unconsciously felt about injecting drug users was a better predictor than how they consciously knew they felt. Also a better predictor than their work stress levels. That's pretty crazy. All right. So now that we've talked about really depressing stuff, let's talk a little bit more positively. If we actually manage these biases and assumptions, challenge them, learn how to not let them influence us, to use system 2 instead of letting system 1 get in our way, it doesn't just cancel out all of the bad stuff that we've talked about. It actually comes with a whole host of positives. Workplaces that are inclusive and diverse perform better across the board. Think about it. If you have a team that is all the same, everyone has similar backgrounds and life experiences, everyone has the same educational background, everyone thinks the same way, how much innovation are you going to have? What's going to happen when there's a problem and everyone's coming at the solution in exactly the same way? You're probably not really going to get very far. It's going to get a bit stale. When we have people with different perspectives, different ideas, different ways of looking at things, we do get better innovation, better problem solving. People can challenge each other and bounce ideas off each other. I know I don't go to advice from people who know exactly the same stuff I do, unless what I'm actually looking for is just support for what I already thought, right? So when we have inclusive and diverse teams, The inclusion part is really important. Diversity on its own, unmanaged, it's not sustainable. Right? We'll talk a bit more about what inclusion is in just a moment. But the team feels better, right? People feel valued. They bring their best selves to work and they do the best work that they can because they know that what they do, their contribution actually matters. Someone actually cares what they're doing and that they belong, they're part of the team. Some of the obvious ones, people are less likely to quit and chuck in sickies when they're actually feeling good about their job and like they're valued there. Better products and customer service. I've already mentioned how there's better innovation and problem solving, but even thinking about what the client needs, depending on what sort of work you're doing, the broader the range of people you have in your team, the more likely someone in your team will have some idea of what's going to be the needs of this particular client base. It might even be in, say, a customer-facing role, the ability to speak to someone in their native language, right, instead of having to struggle through in English. Being able to, speak Auslan, who knows? There's so many different things that you can bring to do a better job when you have a diverse team. Obviously, you're less likely to end up at the Anti-Discrimination Commission. Right. So what is an inclusive workplace? Does anyone have any ideas that you want to throw at me? Go.
Yeah, I think the inclusive means multicultural, and maybe you can respect the people have come from another cultural background. Yeah. And just work together to find the best way to work together, cooperate. Yeah. Yeah. So cooperative. There's a good representation of people from all different backgrounds. Right? So that might mean people of different racial, ethnic, cultural backgrounds, people of different genders, different ages, people with disabilities or not, people with different personalities and tastes in music, people who went to different schools, people from the north side and the south side, different ways of looking at things. Right? There are so many ways that we're diverse. In this room, there would be ways that I'm different from every other woman here, different from every other person who's the same age as me. Even when we have things in common, there may be different things that we can bring. But definitely, having that representation of people from different backgrounds, such as different cultural backgrounds, and respecting and valuing that unique perspective.
I'd say also that for the workplace to be inclusive, it's not enough for the workplace to just actually have those people in it.
Absolutely.
It's also got to cater for their needs.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, where there's women's restrooms, it can be pretty cool if they have sanitary products that we actually happen to need, rather than having to sort of go off and find those ourselves. And it's just one tiny little thing that folks who don't need that stuff go into the bathroom and then breeze back into their desk space and get on with their work. And it would never occur to them if they had folks also running the place that some of the people there might need that stuff.
So absolutely, there's a couple of key things that you raised there. So one, I was mentioning before about being able to understand the needs of a more diverse client base, right? So that's an example where if everyone in the company is men, it just wouldn't occur to them, right? Because it's not their experience. So they wouldn't be able to think of it. And meeting those needs, making those adjustments, being aware that we are all different and different people might have different needs. So things like flexible work arrangements or reasonable adjustments, allowing people to do their work in the best way. It would not be a very inclusive environment, and I've worked in some like this where there is one way that you can perform this task, even if it's really inefficient and you're terrible at doing it that way and you'd do it much better if you could do it this way. No, you must do it the one way that I think that there is. That's not inclusive, that's not valuing different perspectives. So I've put up a picture of a fruit salad here because I think this is a nice analogy, right? You might like any of these particular fruits, but one bowl of just nothing but, I don't know, figs is probably going to get a bit boring pretty quickly, right? That's your homogeneous, all the same team. You're not getting any variety, you're not getting anything different, it's the same. Fruit salad, That's much more interesting. And the flavours, the way that they work together, the different flavours and the textures, it creates something much better than any of them on their own. So that's kind of an analogy for diversity, but the inclusion part is where it is their very difference together that makes it awesome. So inclusion is made up of two key factors: belonging and the valuing of everyone's unique contribution and self. You need to have both of those things to have inclusion. So we are all different, we all do bring something different, and that is absolutely excellent. That's what we want, that's what we get, all the good stuff, all those benefits, and we all belong as part of the team as our own special, unique selves. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. All right, let's get into the really important stuff. Some strategies for you to take home. Some of these, again, if I had more time, like I would normally spend hours talking about this stuff. So I'm going to try and race through as many different strategies as you can use as possible, but some of them won't be in as much detail as I would like. So there's different things that you need to factor in here. We've got strategies for managing our own personal individual biases, for challenging all the unconscious assumptions that are influencing us. But we also need to look at how we make decisions in a broader context, and then in the workplace. What's the organisational culture like? What's the leadership actually doing? If we want to challenge unconscious bias and create a more inclusive workplace, we need to be doing all of these things. Right? So as individuals, we need to be looking at what's going on in my own head, and as an organisation, we need to be looking at what's going on in the culture. How are we actually doing things on a broader context? As far as managing our personal biases, a lot of it is around awareness, right? So becoming aware, beginning to notice and recognise when we have a response that's based on a stereotype or an assumption. Now, I would say don't do this in a harsh and judgmental way at all. I'd say do it in a more curious and compassionate way. Right? So when you have a response based on a stereotype, instead of going, oh my God, I'm a horrible person, I prefer to actually go, oh, okay, look at what my brain just did. What was going on there? Isn't that weird? Okay, where did that come from? Right. So becoming aware of our stereotypes and assumptions is a key part of it. Some other things we can do, this is such a race through, but perspective taking. Actually taking a moment to put ourselves in someone else's shoes and try and imagine things from their perspectives. With their entire life and history and all this stuff that we don't know about that's led them to this point. I find that one really helpful sometimes if someone's in particular a jerk, like, you know, who knows what in their history and environment has led them to be this person. I don't know what's going on in their head. What else? Taking a moment to notice the individual characteristics of other people. Focus on who they are as an individual rather than relying on sort of group stuff, right? So some examples I've seen in research even include asking yourself, when you see someone, notice you're having a stereotype, think, you know, what kind of fruit do I think they'd like? Weird things like that that suddenly make them human, right? And an individual, and we've shifted how we're thinking of people. That's a couple of strategies that we can use to manage our individual biases. Looking at our decision making, right? Really simple thing that we can do is stop and think slow. Don't just go with our gut first reaction. Actually think, wait, hang on, I need to actually think about this. Slow down. Take a moment, count to 5, whatever it is, to actually stop, get away from that automatic instant reaction and go, no, wait, think. Another cool one going back a bit, actually. If you see someone and have an automatic assumption about them, force yourself to think of another option, right? What is another thing that could be true about this person? So, one example, you see a petite black woman wearing scrubs at the supermarket. First thought might be that she's a nurse. What's the second option? Doctor. She's a doctor, exactly. You see, here's another black example, these are American. See a African-American man pushing a lawnmower outside a house in a nice neighbourhood. First thought might be that he's the gardener. Second option?
Homeowner.
She's the homeowner, right? Do you see where I'm going with that?
That's another little quick one you can do. But yes, decision making. Think slow. Remember that we have biases. Don't let system one do all of the thinking. If there are any sources of stress in the decision-making environment that you can remove, do so. When we're stressed out and our brain's already busy with something else, we're going to fall back on shortcuts. Because we can only do one system two thing at a time. So if we're already freaking out over being stressed out or some other decision, everything else is going to be on system one. Try to use facts wherever you can, you know, as much as fact-based rather than subjective criteria. Look out for your decisions, basically. Looking at organisational cultural change, we need to basically change the whole mindset of the organisation, see how we're doing things differently. I hope I have a little bit more information about this coming up. I'll talk about that in a moment. That's just an acronym for everything we need to talk about. I know I don't talk about this in any more detail, but flexible workplaces are a really important part of being inclusive. So it's already been touched on, but a diverse workforce has diverse needs. Right? That might be flexible work arrangements, so that, you know, people can work from home or start and finish at different times, have a life outside of work. It might be about how people actually perform tasks. It might be about adjustments in the workplace so that people can do their job. Try to increase a sense of belonging with everyone in the workplace as well, in how we interact with people, being respectful, having a little bit of compassion for everyone else's perspective. All right. Overall, key things to focus on in workplace culture, if we're looking at challenging unconscious bias, first up, there needs to be awareness of it. If no one's aware of it, it's unconscious, right? If you don't know it's there, there's not much you can do about it. So awareness is absolutely the first thing. Now, this can be through unconscious bias training. It can be through, you know, going and doing reading. It can be through getting online at Project Implicit on the Harvard website. You can Google it, and you can actually do implicit associations tests in the comfort of your own home at your computer, looking at what associations you have about different groups. So awareness. Then basically you need to look at your policies and practices, right? How do we actually treat different people in the workplace? What's our recruitment policies like? Do we have flexible workplace, flexible work arrangements? Are there certain people in the workplace who always end up having to wash the dishes? You know, should that be amended? And there needs to be accountability. If no one's accountable for things actually changing, there might be really good intentions, but it tends not to really go anywhere. All right, a few key points about recruitment and selection, because this is one people often really want to know about. Blind recruitment, that's a really interesting one. You might have seen quite a few companies are doing that now. So when they're actually shortlisting from the applications, there's no identifying information on them. No names, no ages, no addresses, nothing that you can tell sort of age, gender, race, any of that stuff. Seems like a great idea, but some more recent research found it can actually disadvantage the very people that you're trying to get into an organisation. What it comes down to is if there is no other factor influencing the decision than unconscious bias, by all means, use blind recruitment. If one group might actually have a slightly better resume because of their group membership, don't use blind recruitment, right? So if you're looking at, for example, a woman's CV, maybe there are gaps for maternity leave and things like that. Taken out of context, that just looks bad. Maybe people have had different opportunities because of their race or their age. They're really young, so they haven't had as much experience. In those contexts, blind recruitment, again, is going to work against them. So be careful with that one. Can be useful, but only use it if that's the only thing that's differentiating. Be aware, if you're trying to bring more women into the workplace, that there are actually differences in how men and women apply for jobs. So in general, women will only apply for roles if they feel they meet 85 to 100% of the criteria. Men will often apply if they feel they meet about 35 to 65 and figure, I can probably learn the rest, right?
This is based on science, guys. This is research. So be aware of that when you're looking at your role descriptions, right? Maybe, for example, instead of listing every single would-be nice wish list, strip it back to what are the absolute must-haves for this role. And then if some nice stuff comes along with it, great. Look at your role descriptions. What do the jobs actually look like? And how are they worded in the description? Have you worded it in such a way that it's only going to be appealing to very specific types of people and maybe exclude others? Or have you made the role sound really boring, you know, to people with different backgrounds? I think I have time to really quickly tell you about this. Right, so they did a longitudinal study looking at men and women who were really good at STEM at university. Looked also at their language skills. And what they found was that when women were really, really good at science, maths, technology, they tended to also have really good language skills. There were a significant proportion of men who had really good STEM skills, not as good language skills. Not bad, just nothing exceptional, right? So when they tracked these people longitudinally, what they found was a lot of the women actually went into other fields. They went into law or medicine or something where they could use both, right? Where they could use their logical, rational brain and their language, social skills too. So plenty of men who didn't have much interest in the social and language stuff, very, very happy to just, you know, focus on something that was purely sort of more scientific or mathematical. But the women weren't attracted to those roles because they wanted to be able to interact with people and do all that other stuff too. Right? So one thing to look at is, could we change the roles or the descriptions to include a little bit more of that social interaction, project management, maybe client relations, not just client relations, but including that in. And you might actually find that that changes the demographics of all sorts of people who apply for the roles. So I think it was Hewlett-Packard looked at their sales roles, and for years the way that they've been described came across as really old school sales, really aggressive, and you've got to get in there and make them buy it. And that really influenced who was applying, right, in both men and women. Changed it to be more modern, more about sort of collaboration, negotiation, trying to get the best outcome for the customer, completely shifted and increased the number of people who are applying for the role. Right? Think about how you recruit and try to recruit for what's missing instead of what's going to fit. We want diversity because we want different perspectives and ideas coming in, because we don't want everyone thinking the same way all the time. So instead of thinking what's going to be the best fit and mesh really well, obviously you want people with similar values and you don't want complete, you know, jerks, but maybe flip it around and think, all right, what don't we have on this team? What perspective or characteristic or way of looking at things do we not have here that really add value to the team? So trying to change how we're looking at that. Remaining aware the whole time, so this might even be like sticking post-it notes on your computer screen when you're looking at applications. I will notice the reactions that I have to names and stuff on these. Might sound silly, but it does actually help. And making sure that your selection panels are diverse if you can. When we have really homogenous selection panels, everyone's kind of the same. One, we can see the value in people like us, so everyone on that panel is going to see how excellent the people like them are. We can't help it, right? We all know how awesome we are, and anyone like us, obviously they're awesome too. And when we have really cohesive, homogenous groups, they tend not to actually make great decisions. It's a thing called groupthink. It's responsible for some of the biggest military blunders in history. Just picture it, group of people, get on really well, think in very similar ways, similar backgrounds, life experiences. Someone says, this is what I think we should do, and everyone else goes, yes, that was easy, let's take lunch. Right? There's no dissent, there's no challenge, there's no other perspective, so you don't end up making good decisions. When you have diverse selection panels, not only do you get around that, but the chances are you'll have a few people who can see how awesome someone like them, who is not like everyone else on the panel is, so better chance of recognising the value of a greater range of people. Right, that was a little bit of a marathon for me of like how much stuff can I try and get in any useful detail, but we have reached the end. So now it's time for questions. I hope that actually was somewhat cohesive. I felt like I was kind of rambling there, but I made it to the end. So thank you so much for listening. Yes.
I have a question about, I guess it's got to do with inclusiveness, and I guess a lot of the focus, especially in STEM, is bringing women into STEM. And I like to make sure that we don't just bring white women into STEM.
Yeah.
And some things that I see that trouble me are some of the teams I work with are quite diverse, but it's still the same people talking at the meetings. And I find that really difficult, and I'm not sure how to address it.
Yeah. So that is a challenging one, and that's part of not having an inclusive workplace, right? So particularly people from different cultures, there might be different social customs about when it's appropriate to speak. So one story that came up in a training session I delivered, which was really, really interesting, a participant was telling me about one place that they've worked, and there was a woman who never contributed during meetings. And people were like, oh, that's weird, she never talks, why doesn't she ever talk, you know? Until someone actually asked her and talked to her about it, and her cultural background was one where you never interrupt, right? It's just not done. And they were having the sort of meetings that you might be quite familiar with, where there's never actually a gap. I was in one of those today, right? There is never a gap or a break in the conversation to put in your 2 cents where you're not speaking over someone, right? So there was never an opportunity for her to contribute. So in the interest of being more inclusive, they talked to her further and decided to try it out. They actually allocated space in the meeting where everyone else would just shut up. And it was her time to contribute. They did this at the end of the meeting, so they found not only did they get to hear her perspective, and she finally got to say what she was going to say, but they also found it became a really valuable reflective process, and kind of to summarise what had happened and wrap everything up. So it can be tricky, because we need to change what we're doing. We need to make sure that we're allowing space. Right? That's part of being inclusive. Why is this person not contributing? You know, maybe it might even be if someone's just really shy or introverted, you know, that they wouldn't feel comfortable interrupting. So we need to think, how can we actually make it so that everyone has that space to contribute? Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Oh, I think you were slightly ahead, but you're next.
In the STEM space, or I guess in a lot of different things, there might be diversity and there might be inclusiveness, but you find that management up are all one group and type of people.
Yeah, so that's an interesting one too. We don't just have associations about or biases about, you know, race and gender and age and those things that we always think of. It can be about the job description or what team someone's in, right? And it can be about levels of management, things like that. And we do often find that, in particular, there can be a lack of diversity in certain areas, and that can be quite hard to change. It is important that leadership is on board if we're trying to change a workplace culture. It's been shown to be one of the most important factors in whether there will be change. As far as change from the bottom up, that's tricky, aside from, you know, waiting for some people to drop. Yeah, I guess, I don't know, they need to get on board with it, and if perhaps they get on board with it, if you're saying it's inclusive and diverse, then someone's got to be talking some talk somewhere. I guess they need to look at walking their walk, and even just with how they work with other levels in the company, you know, try and break up that hierarchy a little bit, have more diversity on project teams, for example, you know, like someone from leadership and some people from other levels at other teams. Try and break up those silos and bands. I wish there was an easy answer.
Oh, just to the point about the same people talking in meetings all the time. I have that personality where that's often me. Yeah, I know, right? And I got called on it once. It was just beautiful. I'll never forget it. We're having, you know, some group discussion, and somebody actually said, you know what, I'd really like to hear from somebody that's not you or you. It was like, oh. And it was wonderful. I'm just going to shut up now. And, so if you've got the ability to call it, it can work.
Yeah, because I don't think it is unconscious, and it's just these personalities are so excited. Even when someone starts talking, they just get talked over.
I've been guilty of it sometimes, just in conversations. You're just like, oh my god, but what about this thing? Calling it out can be, if you can do it diplomatically, can be useful.
I think it's great that some companies are obviously talking to folks like you and trying to change, but at sort of a worldwide level, you've got some big scale influences like the popular media, and there's big sort of events as well that sort of happen, like this James Damore memo that came out of Google, and you've got those sort of things that like occupy so much space in the field. You've got a few people trying to change things, and then switch on the TV and there's Mr. Robot depicting every computer programmer as being a dude in a hoodie. So how do you fight that when you're every programmer, Damien. You love your
Stereotypes same time. It can be really disheartening to see, the lack of change, or where sometimes it feels like things are going backwards. What I like to remember, a couple of things. One, every little bit, creates a ripple effect. And there's a thing called the tipping point, right? So it's this phenomena in psychology, in social change in particular, where for a long time, people are working and working and working towards some sort of social change, and it looks like nothing's happening. And then something, almost quite suddenly, it'll seem like overnight, it flips, right? So I feel like I saw this myself just in the last few years with same-sex marriage. Right? 10 years ago, I remember speaking to friends saying, it's never going to happen. It's never going to happen. And then suddenly it's just country after country after country is suddenly coming to the party. That's not to say we're there yet, but there has been massive social change. And I also like to look at how far we've come. It can be really bleak to look at how far there is still to go, but if we despair, then we're not, we're not going to get anywhere. Right? So look at where TV shows and movies, some of them at least, are trying to show different depictions of different types of people with genuine, well-developed human characters. Look at the fact that I can be standing here and have a job and talking to you and people are listening to me. Let's go back 100 years and see how it goes then. Right? We are making progress, and we can't lose sight of how far we've come. Got to hold on to that.
I had a speaker at Health Hackathon this morning talk about this issue, and an interesting perspective they gave was a lot of companies focus on gender equality, like we've got 100 employees, 99 of them male, we have to, or we've got 100 employees, 99% of them are Caucasian, we have to, whatever. They were saying that's the wrong approach. The right approach is look at the skills that different people have and try and work out, well, which ones don't we have, and put values on that. And he referred to a book, which I can't remember, but it was written by an economist on this topic. And that economist comes at the whole problem from an economic point of view, like you touched on it a little earlier. I just wanted to hear a bit more on that.
So, setting targets of, we need to get more women, or we need to get more non-white people, or we need to get more whatever it is, that can be a really counterproductive way of doing things for a couple of reasons. One, when there are targets in particular, that can disadvantage the very people who are coming in, because it creates this perception that, oh, you're only here because you're a diversity hire. Right? Was doing training for electricians' apprentices, and so much complaining from a few of the guys. They were trying to ban female apprentices because a few of them had missed out on jobs to female apprentices who beat them in every single assessment. But as far as they were concerned, it was still because they were women, right? So that perception can be really, really strong. It can also create an us versus them mentality. You might not always necessarily get the best person in, right? So I agree that just saying, oh, we need to get more of whatever type of person in isn't the right way to do it, even though actually that is kind of what you want the end result to be. So I would say, yeah, focusing on the skills is a good thing to try, but it's tricky because we might not see those skills that we're looking for in certain groups of people because of the biases we have. So it's a bit of a catch-22. One suggestion that I've seen that I think is kind of neat is instead of saying we need to increase the diversity, is we need to reduce the homogeneity. So how can we mix up the teams? So, you know, say maximum 70% homogeneity of race in any given team. Right? Maximum 70% homogeneity of gender or age or educational background. We just want to mix it up and have people in different positions and actually be bringing those skills in and really valuing them. I don't know if I've just rambled and not answered your question at all.
The comment that I'd like to make about that particular thing with respect to affirmative action is quite often people will say, oh, that's terrible, you can't have affirmative action. And they're saying it because the reflex is, oh, well, we're being forced to reduce our standards to hiring people with this particular sought-after trait. And the very fact that they would think that, you know, shows these cognitive biases, because the assumption is that people of that particular trait, instead of flipping it on its head and saying, well, look, at the moment, your performance as a hiring team, you are failing to hire these people. So I'm going to measure your performance the way I would measure any other performance characteristic of any other person performing a function in our corporation. And the performance characteristic I'm going to measure you on is your ability to hire these candidates with these sought-after features. And there's no presumption that we need to lower standards or change anything about our hiring criteria.
Yeah, it is really telling, isn't it? That, oh, if we get people of this group, then obviously standards are going to drop. What does that say about your association?
And you only need one person of that group to stuff something up, and then they're all terrible. We've had to drop all the standards, because, you know, whereas like white dudes screw stuff up every day of the week.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, confirmation bias is a big one. I don't know how we're going for question time. Did anyone else have any other questions they wanted to ask out loud? Yes, sorry. That's right.
You made a comment before about someone where they're talking and they need to then start walking it. Is there resources and stuff to help people? We've had comments made in our business where it's like, oh, we want to be diverse. I'm like, well, that's great. What do you want to do to move forward on that? And the response was, oh, I don't have an answer to that.
Yeah.
Is there resources to help move those people that's like, we want to do this, but we don't quite know how?
Yeah, it is tricky, and to know where to start. I don't know if I've given you enough information to have any idea of any strategies you could try today. There are books and resources that you can look at. So one good one that I thought was really cool, it's kind of behavioural economics approach to inclusion. It's called Inclusion Nudges. That one has lots of, it's just page after page of different suggested things you can do. You could seek out training, or there are consultants as well who can come out and actually sort of help you with those processes. There are some other books as well, and even stuff on like online and YouTube that you can find, but I'm happy to chat to you later and recommend some other materials and things.
Well, in order to get that out to as many people as possible, could you post a link in the meetup?
Yeah, I can recommend that. Yeah. And I can send you a list of few recommended books. Anything else before we call it a break? And you can feel free to come up and ask me questions one-on-one while we hang out. No? Excellent. Well, thanks again, everyone, and I really hope there was something useful you can take away there.